Terrific stuff. Now, in a healthcare summit 2 years ago, when Senator John McCain challenged President Obama on policy, Obama offered this in response. Take a listen.
Let me just make this point, John, because we're not campaigning anymore. The election's over.
All right. But the question is, today, is this a new Obama? Someone worried about his fiscal and economic legacy. Is that possible? The legacy question. Let's bring in Democratic strategist Steve McMahon and Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. Steve McMahon, is President Obama worried about his legacy, and will that make him more amenable to make a deal?
Well, I think every president thinks about their legacy, and especially any president who's elected for a second term, and they're looking at never again running for office again. And I think the reason you're seeing the president bring everybody in, business leaders, labor leaders, and members of the opposition party, is because he understands the significance of the moment, he understands the urgency of the need, and he wants to bring everybody together around something where everybody gives a little bit, but the country gets something significant, and frankly, something that the voters are asking for, which is a government that finally works.
All right. Well, I agree. I think voters would like a government that finally works and grows the economy. Grover Norquist, you probably saw all the stories today in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. The president's going to take this show on the road. Now, what I'm trying to figure out, Grover Norquist, is this. What is the show he's taking on the road? What does Obama want? What is inside his head? Where's this going to play out?
Well, what you're seeing is somebody who doesn't think the campaign's over. He's running a campaign. You saw his speech, the press conference, so he didn't take any questions, and he had, all his supporters behind him and cheering for him. It was a campaign rally held at the White House at public expense as his conversation about how he was drawing a line in the sand and was insisting on higher taxes on people who work on Saturdays and save and invest, and how this was going to help the economy. People who hope he's going to help you rein in spending, he does want to play to his legacy. His legacy is dramatically expanding the size of government. Now, Larry, you may not see that as a good legacy, but he does. He's happy that he's made the government bigger, and he's made it so much bigger that he's now turned to the American people and the Republicans and said, you have to raise taxes to pay for my big government, or I'm going to let everything blow up. And the Republican answer, as it was in 2011, is, the problem, Mr. President, is you're overspending,
right.
Not that the people are undertaxed.
Well, don't go wobbly.
That's the conflict.
I don't want the Republicans to go wobbly on me. That's the thing. But, Steve McMahon, you heard Grover's point of view. I happen to agree. I believe the president, now, maybe he'll prove me wrong, but I think he'd rather have a larger government than a smaller government, Steve. And therefore, I think he'd rather have higher taxes than lower taxes. Where do I have it wrong?
Well, I think he certainly would rather have a government where senior citizens have Social Security and where Medicare is protected and where Medicaid provides a safety net. And I think he's proud of his achievement on health care reform. But I also think that he's come forward and said, I'll take $3 of spending cuts for every dollar in additional revenue. He campaigned on the idea that we have to get to a better balance, and the way to get to a better balance on the budget is by asking people who make a little bit more and have done a little better in this economy to do a little bit more and give a little bit more. And he's not suggesting that you can't get there in only one way. He's saying he's open to ideas, and I think that's what the conversation's about. Congress is there to do a job, and it's not just to say no to the president. It's to actually get something done.
Well,
and the president's reached out his hand.
I think that's what Mr. Boehner's been saying to his own conference. But, Grover, I'd just like to hear you on the policy issue. John Boehner is saying we can limit, he would be willing to limit tax loopholes and tax deductions on upper income taxpayers as long as the marginal tax rates stay the same. So there's a revenue increase in there. Grover, can you support that? Can Americans for Tax Reform support the, quote, revenue increase from loophole closers, as Boehner is suggesting?
Well, actually, if you read Boehner's speech, that's not what he said. He said he's for revenue increases that flow from tax reform. Economic growth is the path he wants to move forward on. That's what he said in the 2011 Budget Control Act debates. It's what he's saying now. He's not agreed to some static model tax increase. And, of course, if you gave up deductions and credits, Larry, the way the Democrats would structure them is they'd phase them out, so it would be a marginal tax rate increase on higher income people. It wouldn't be just eliminating deductions and credits. We need economic growth. If you grow at 2% a year versus 4% a year, a 4% a year growth over a decade nets $5 trillion to the government. There is no tax increase anybody's talking about that would raise $5 trillion. Growth will do that, and that means a lower capital gains tax, a lower corporate rate, and a lower individual rate, all things the president's on the other side of at present.
Well, but
All right.
But Grover,
Go ahead,
I mean,
Steve, real quick. Give
if I remember correctly, the 1990s, when the tax rates were exactly what the president would like them to be today, there was growth, and people did pretty well. They made plenty of money, and in fact, the budget was balanced, and there was a surplus when George Bush took office. So there was a period in the 90s when the very policies that you say didn't work worked pretty well for everybody,
well, we don't know
especially the people watching this program.
A lot of other things going on. I appreciate the point, Steve. Of course, Clinton cut the capital gains tax. They also cut other savings taxes. They also cut spending. And he also was the beneficiary of a technology boom. But I want to say,
none of that happened until the Republicans took control of Congress.
That is true. I want to say, Steve, though, in all honesty, I'm waiting. You know what? I haven't said a bad word about the president since his reelection. Not one. I want to see what he comes up with, and I admire Speaker Boehner for trying to come up with a compromise and making a concession. Anyway, gentlemen, thank you, Steve McMahon and Grover Norquist.